Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and today I want to talk about deceptively bad cards. I've often said that Smash Up is largely a game without bad cards, whereas a deck building game might have bad cards as a slowdown mechanic, like victory points in Dominion. Smash Up is preconstructed, and every card is designed to deliver value. Value will not always be the same intra-faction, which is expected, but sometimes the value is a bit too low for my liking. Sometimes a card offers less value than comparable cards in the game for questionable reasons. I was inspired to do this list because people had been asking about Marvel, and I was thinking about how Marvel has more deck sifting abilities than usual. In case I don't use that term often, deck sifting uses the discard or bottom of the deck in exchange for additional draw power, as opposed to just drawing cards. You see this with cards like Field Trip or From Q with Love. So for this list, these might be the cards you would sift, because they do not deliver as much value as they should in my opinion. This is obviously my opinion, and I know that there will be some disagreement on some choices, but my criteria looks at cards compared to their peers in the same category. With few exceptions, most of these are not unique cards, so they have plenty of comparables, and if a card seems unnecessarily limited or restricted, that's a strong consideration. Most importantly, I am only looking at Pretty and beyond, because by then, the game should have developed enough of a baseline to avoid these. Also, I don't want to talk about vampires. I want to talk about cards rarely discussed. If applicable, I will try and discuss what I think that the card should do instead. So here are 12 bad cards for consideration. Why 12? I just think that the best things come in packs of 12, and I wanted many people to misinterpret that statement immensely. Number 12 is Dwarf King, who I am including so that I can talk about a particular card later due to some early disagreements with someone whose name rhymes with onus, as in the Latin root of onerous, meaning burden. This is an example of a card that is way outclassed by its peers. Yes, Dwarf King is still 5 power, but faction leaders should emphasize their ability, and this one is problematic. Technically, his ability is blank due to unfortunate wording in the rulebook, but that is clearly a mistake. But his ability is still limited. It only applies to play on minion treasures, of which there are 10 of 22, and one of those, Magic Missile, never goes to the discard pile. And some of them you wouldn't play on your own minions, but you could grab them if they were played on yours. While I am aware that the ability is global and dwarves rely on these treasures, that to me just points to a general flaw in the dwarf game plan. Of the 9 remaining treasures, very few are standout. Some, like Potion of Redundancy Potion, can be great. But the ability would be much better if you did not have 3 gold diggers who make it less important that they go to your hand, because you could just pull them from the discard pile anyway. For Dwarf King to be better, you need to recur several treasures at once, and you may not have space in your hand, so you need to discard them anyway, which is what Gold Digger is for. Because of other issues with dwarves, I have no suggestions to offer for the Dwarf King alone. Number 11 is Sidekick. With this card, it's important to stress that the potential for a good outcome does not overcome severe limitations, especially when the work is done by other factions. For superheroes, and mild-mannered citizen is not a good sidekick target. I know there are great partners, but to me, the partner is saving this overly restrictive card. If you view Sidekick as a summon, which it is, it's not just a restriction on requiring a minion. It's a restriction on having a higher power minion, and it's a restriction that requires specific power, but can also only play a specific power. For the superheroes, who are supposed to have great superpowers, this is surprisingly weak and slow. 7 power is also a lot to leave out on a base. It's very expensive in terms of cards for playing at 2, and it's not easy to play. I think this card was unnecessarily nerfed for thematic purposes. If you wanted extra plays, then I would have made it be a one-time start of turn effect that plays a 2 on this base if you have a 5. This would have been interesting, as it would have allowed a single 2 to turn into 2 5s from your deck. It would increase the risk-reward of leaving a 2 out there. Number 10 is Ronin. It's quite easy for a 3 to reach 4 power. It's quite easy for a 3 to generate a power counter. It's quite easy for a 3 to have greater potential. Ronin is either 3 or 4. 4 power wouldn't be the worst thing if his condition weren't so limiting. Ronin has to be your only minion on a base, which means you cannot lead with your 2s on that base. While this does reinforce pivoting with yokai attack, the limitation just seems so unnecessary, especially when compared with Drunken Master, and he can easily place the counter. The only time Ronin gets an on-play advantage is in Phase 3, but that would mean that he would have to be your only minion on a base, and the best way of triggering plays in Phase 3 is Heart of Battle, which requires a minion on the base, and he's just sad. The Samurai get no power counter synergy, so that type of power really doesn't appeal to them. It also has nothing to do with the overall Samurai theme of going to the discard pile, so my small fix at this time would be to allow his counter to be transferred on going to the discard pile. Number 9 is Snuggly Bear. If I were to make a video of factions I don't understand, teddy bears would be high on that list. And they have their strengths, but Snuggly Bear is not one of them. Snuggly Bear is meant to be free power and minion quantity. The problem is twofold. Other factions do this better, and the teddy bears don't really gain anything from it. It provides no synergy with their minions. It's a terrible card to play with Care Package. Bear Picnic and Cuddle are antagonistic, so they have no relevance here, and there's nothing particularly noteworthy about Too Cute. Love Overload can avoid them, but it's a special that is played on breaking, and the Snuggly Bears aren't great at breaking anything. One Snuggly Bear could make Tea Party an instant draw, but Tea Party is fairly easy to trigger anyway. So the only two considerations are Square Deal, because the Snuggly Bears do empty your hand, and Group Hug, which actively does benefit from the Snuggly Bears. But it normalizes their power because they are ones, and it's only one card, a card that also blocks Love Overload. But the bigger issue is that the other cards just do what they are trying to do better. Zapbots don't have the same local restriction, chain at a much higher power output, and don't have any timing restrictions. A Deputy is a free, unblockable play that yields more power than a Snuggly Bear. But Snuggly Bear's timing also works against the faction considerably. Snuggly Bear has only one chance to react. This means that a Snuggly Bear drawn with Care Package could never be played to follow the Care Package minion unless Care Package came first, which is unfortunate. At the very least, drop the first minion restriction. Number 8 is Teleport Error, another card that I believe is unnecessarily weakened for thematic purposes. The random nature of this card makes it difficult for this card to be effective, other than kicking someone off for the sake of kicking them off. Antagonistic movement is great for using power against its controller and increasing your efficiency, and this card makes it completely unreliable. But what makes it worse to me is that there are plenty of cards that do what this card should do, making me wonder why they felt this card needed to be limited. For moving opposing minions, Shanghai does just that. But there are plenty of move a minion cards unqualified. There are plenty of move an opposing minion cards, even if you wanted that limitation. I don't see why you would use this card on yourself, given its random nature, and the presence of better options within the faction. It's very funny and on point for Star Trek, but funny doesn't win games. Number 7 is Berserk. Given that power wins bases, you are going to see a lot of cards that add power on this list. Berserk can add 3 power, which is a noticeable amount even when temporary. But it comes at the cost of putting a card on top of your deck, which is wholly unnecessary. For Vikings, they don't have any benefit to putting cards on top of their deck. It does offer synergy outside the faction, but it makes most Viking games very unenjoyable as it gives stale draw. But even worse is the fact that my original statement is true. A cost to getting 3 power is wholly unnecessary. In addition to having other cards that grant a flat 3 power, including a double feature in both standard and non-standard form, there is one of those cards in this very set, and it's better. This ability, while thematically cool, artificially holds the Vikings back and only makes sense when you get benefits from having a lower hand size, because it's literally repeating the ability of other cards in the faction. Number 3 is another power-granting standard action, but one that caps out at 3, Mummy Strength. This is like Berserk in that it requires a cost to get to 3, but is significantly harder to set up because Berserk can take care of its own business. Mummy Strength needs help. Given that it is terminal power, your action is being used to finish off a base, so you need a minion to uncover the card, otherwise you lose it. Your minion uncovering comes from Pyramid Engineer, but they are also your best way at burying, so it forces an inefficiency that is extremely unfortunate. For all the difficulty in getting this to work, 3 power is not worth it, and is eclipsed by infinitely easier cards. There are a good number of cards that are 2 as a base and 4 with an easily achievable situation. I would want Mummy Strength to be +4 in this regard, or be a card that grants power when uncovered, like Blessing of Anubis, just at a higher rate for a single minion. Number 5 is Prepare for Battle, which earns the curious honor of being in the All-Star deck as well. Let's assume for a moment that there is the notion that there are bad cards regularly that I need to sift. If the bad cards outnumbered the good cards, I wouldn't want to play this game. So the good cards must outnumber the bad, which means it is very likely that you will draw 2 good cards and be forced to put one on the bottom of the deck to draw the other. I know I have given Mystic Studies a lot of grief over the years, but just drawing both cards is better than possibly losing a good one to the bottom. If you overdrew and were forced to discard, I would prefer that. If it is a card I truly did not want, I don't want it on the bottom of my deck, as I still have to deal with it later, or worry about it being shuffled to the top. In the discard, I get to reset my deck 1 card sooner, and that could be important. This card is an action that draws 1 card and has no upside in my opinion. Neither Prepare the Battle or Mannersbot help each other. Space Knight can give you some advantage, but it's so minute. You just know when to not play a card that will harm you. Not even Poopox can benefit from this, because Prepare for Battle does not give you any information. If these other cards were the main trilogy, Prepare for Battle is the prequel trilogy. At a bare minimum, make the bottom portion optional, but for a faction with great card draw anyway, is this even necessary? Number 4 is Shield of Ubiquity. This card seems tantalizing on paper, and you can theory craft yourself into thinking that this card is tantalizing. +2 for each of something? These cards tend to be amazing. The problem is, this card has never done anything for me, and it works entirely against what the Warriors want. Warriors want to add monsters, which typically add 3 power on average. So Shield of Ubiquity is adding 2 power for each instance of 3 defense, resulting in a net loss of power. For the card to be useful, you need to have monsters, which the Warriors excel at playing. But it's still a net loss, outside of very good luck with web trolls. If a base naturally had a ton of monsters, this card could theoretically be useful. But the entire Warrior strategy endgame is based on destroying monsters, thus rendering this card useless. Any card that removes monsters removes the power granted by the shield. Taunter adds a monster that can result in a net loss of power. Berserker destroys a monster. Star Player wants monsters destroyed. Big Hero destroys monsters. Cleave destroys. Dungeon Bait can destroy or add a net loss. Ruckus can obliterate all monsters, making the shield 0. Warcry is the perfect form of power conversion that also works against the shield. A card like Campaign is much better, because it locks in the power and allows monsters to be destroyed afterward. Shield of Ubiquity does not. What this card should do instead is something that would be quite unique. Prevent uncontrolled monsters from being affected by other players. This way, monsters would be your personal defense army that you can add to slow down the game and destroy to speed it up. Number 3 is the last power-granting action card, and that is Fairy Godmother. This card features drawing a card as an ore at a time when the Fairy Titan did not exist. And I have a confession to make. I have actually used this option, having literally nothing else to do. But that does not justify itself. You have a choice between a card drawing a card, which is a waste of an action, and you'd be better off leaving the card in the box, and +2 temporary power, which is the worst temporary power increase. So many other cards do that or more, or are permanent, and this is just laughable. The only thing that beats this in the Princess deck is a Soul Heirloom. The second Heirloom adds more power, and if you think that the ore makes it a powerful card, think again. Thankfully, the Fairy Godmother gets it right on the second time around with an ability that will suit the princesses much better. Number 2 is the last minion on the list, Grandma. Grandma manages to break both the Sonus rule and the Bandit rule simultaneously while having other problems as well. I don't think I've publicly discussed the Sonus rule much, but it basically states that a 4 should never be the talent or ongoing form of a 2. There are several corollaries to this, but the Grandma is awful by herself and useless if you have a Granny. It breaks the Bandit rule because this card is objectively worse than a Spy, significantly worse, and Spy isn't even considered to be that great. What Spy can do 3 times, Grandma can do once. But the final problem is that the Grandma runs the risk of being item potent given her ability. If you have a favorable card on top, Playing multiple grandmas will produce the same result. If you use Granny and leave the card, Grandma will have a dead ability that turn. This card is incredibly frustrating, and the irony is that the card I'm most likely to want to bury on the bottom is Grandma herself. Because of my strict adherence to the Sonus rule, she should be given literally anything else, something new. Have her combine with Granny by having an ability to put a minion on the top of your deck if the top card of your deck is in action, or the same ability with a minion, or mix the two. Grannies have so many problems, but they start with Grandma because she is just so underwhelming. And finally, my number 1 is Secret Stash, the most unique card on this list, and not in a good way. I love risk-reward cards that act like a magnet. I love cards that you can play on the first turn to set up. I hate this card. I hate Swipe, and Swipe is better. Secret Stash is a chance that you might get 2 treasure cards. Emphasis on might. If you solo base, you will get 2. And with Cat Burglar, that is always a possibility. But it adds 2 treasures to the reward. If you lose this base, you are actively helping another player. It could mean better choices for them and higher quantity for them. Depending on the player count and reward, it can mean that neither of those treasures actually go to you. You could be giving a reward to someone else who did not even score points on the base. As someone who is literally a bandit, I am highly offended by this card. The best case scenario is to use it terminally following a Cat Burglar, but this type of terminal non-power makes soloing a base very hard. A similar card would be Happily Ever After, which gets you a VP instantly. Secret Stash requires extreme luck to get a card that would give you a VP on a later turn. It might get you 2 treasures that can be discarded for a VP, also on another turn. So the upside is not great, and the floor is spectacularly negative, making this card a total bust for me. If I were playing against Thieves, I would do what I could to not solo the base even more than usual. If Thieves are truly committed to treasures, then Secret Stash could have done something more interesting, like allowing you to draw 2 when you draw 1, putting the other on the bottom of the deck. So now you are hunting through the deck for more valuables and can do something with them other than just discarding them. Or increase your hand size based on the number of treasures so that it feels like an actual stash. Thematically, Thieves are a mixed opportunity overall, but this card definitely deserves a nomination for worst modern card in the game. So those are 12 bad cards that no one ever really talks about. Which cards are on your list? Do you disagree with any of my suggestions? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.